Good afternoon. We are here for a Planning, Housing, and Parks Committee work session. We have two items on our agenda today, starting with a briefing on troubled properties and then a zoning text amendment sponsored by Councilmember Mink, who I believe will be joining us. With that, I will turn it over briefly to council staff to walk us through the packet, and then we can turn it over to DHCA as needed and necessary to walk us through our update.
Perfect. Good afternoon. Just staff wanted to note that in the report, on the staff report, it's just some minor updates from the previous session on March 3rd. The report covers FY24 data. And for today's briefing, the DHCA does have a presentation covering some preliminary FY25 data on troubled properties. The full report for FY25 will be coming out later this fall, usually in October, so we'll wait for that. But there's some early insights, I think, to be gained from today. And I just also want to note that the Executive Regulation 1-25 has been put on the county register back in February, but the council has not formally received that transmittal yet. So once that does arrive, we'll be able to get it on the council's agenda. And for today, there's some background on 125 as proposed, and again, the department will cover that in their presentation. So,
Sounds good. All right, we're ready.
Okay. So for the record, my name's Scott Bruton. I'm the Director of the Department of Housing and Community Affairs. Oh, that looks better. And with me are, if you'd like to introduce.
Good afternoon, Council President and Councilmember Fanny Gonzalez. My name is Nathan Bovell. I am the Division Chief for Community Development.
Good afternoon, Tamala Robinson, Manager for Code Enforcement.
Okay, and would you like, we can just go through the presentation, and that the presentation provides some background information, but it also answers the specific questions that we received from council staff from the PHP committee.
That would be fine.
Okay.
And the only caveat I'd like to just mention before we start is that any reference to FY25 data is preliminary. So don't expect that the numbers that we present will be exactly what you see when the troubled property report comes out in September. But this is a preliminary look. It's pretty close to what we expect to happen. But for the sake of discussion, I think there's some valuable information about the FY25 data in this report.
Absolutely. I'm always here for a chat. Sorry.
Great.
And I think,
Continue.
yeah, and if I remember correctly, we are required by law to submit the troubled properties report on September 15th. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So it'll be transmitted to the council by or before September 15th with the finalized data.
Tamla, you can do
would
your
you like-
introductions and walk us through.
Sure. All righty. Sorry. Thank you. Side 2 basically is for the requested information. Originally, preliminary data for FY25 shows that 12 properties successfully addressed and resolved all violations noted during the first initial inspection and the first re-inspection. I think the question was how many properties resolved all complaints between the first and second inspection, and there were 12. And this reflects improved responsiveness and compliance among property owners. And it also goes into explaining that it's important to note that the number of re-inspections required can vary significantly depending on the size of the actual property itself, as the larger properties may have more violations and it takes a longer time to cure those compared to the smaller properties. And then we're happy to say that one of the questions was what was our current number of active inspectors. So we are fully staffed at 37 full-time inspectors. We do still continue to have 2 out, which are part of our multifamily team on extended leave. And then we have 2 vacancies as far as code enforcement for our program manager positions. One with our multifamily team and then the other one that was just awarded to us for July, and that's already, we're out for recruitment for that. So hopefully by the end of August, we'll have a full staff complement. And then another question was how were we prioritizing the order of the inspections that came about with the rent stabilization. We kind of changed it around a little bit to prioritize properties that may have been at risk or trouble to request a sooner inspection. And so we start with our emergency cases first, and then we prioritize the at-risk that have cured all of their violations during their inspection, and that request an actual reinspection sooner than their normal scheduled inspection. And then the trouble properties that are already scheduled, they typically are already scheduled for the fiscal year, but if they called sooner, then we would get them in, sooner, as long as they had submitted their quarterly maintenance logs and their corrective action plan, and then our compliant properties that are already scheduled as well.
And just for the record, the compliant properties are traditionally inspected every 3 years. The at-risk properties can be every 1, 2, or 3. It's traditionally 2. And the troubled properties we're required to inspect annually, as long as they're troubled.
So we pulled some information as far as how, the last time we met, which was back in March, there were only 11 properties that had requested a reinspection. So for FY25, we actually had 21 that actually requested a reinspection, and they did receive a reinspection during FY21. It's only 19 that we actually had to perform, because 2 of them were previously, in FY23, they were troubled. 24, their designation changed. However, they were still considered troubled because they had not complied with giving us the corrective action plan or the quarterly maintenance logs. They did that in FY25, so they didn't require a new inspection because they were compliant based on their scores in 24.
And lastly, it takes about 90 days for us to inspect the property after requested inspection has come to us.
Based on the prioritization list that Ms. Robinson detailed.
That's correct. Typically, it was approximately 90 days. A little sooner. We got some in sooner than 90 days, but on average, it was 90 days. And then here's our preliminary numbers for this particular year. So total trouble properties last year was 93, and that included 9 compliance. So it actually included the 39 properties that did not submit their quarterly logs or corrective action plan. And then last time we met, there was currently 90 properties on the list because 3 had resolved their non-compliance. And then the at-risk properties was 101, which also included the 67 identified the previous year, since we weren't doing those inspections, we were doing them biannually. This year, for FY25, it looks like we have 30 troubled properties. We will have, and it's preliminary, it could be more or less. We're working through the non-compliance as far as the corrective action plan and the quarterly maintenance log, so that's to be determined there. And then we identified 58 properties this year as at risk based on the inspections that we did. And then we had the 34 that was previously at risk. So again, that's preliminary, so we should have all of that up and running here shortly. Wanted to add a little bit about what rent stabilization had done as far as the troubled properties law. And since the implementation of the rent stabilization law, which of course restricted the increase, then properties, in response to that, many of the larger properties consulted. Some did advocates or consultants to help them maneuver through their inspection and reinspection process. So what we saw was a lot of the largest properties brought in maintenance teams from third parties to do inspections of all their units before we arrived, which is a good thing, and it kind of limited the amount of violations that we saw during our inspections this year. And one of the things that we can say is, although we saw a lot of improvement, we weren't really sure, we don't have the data as to whether or not they were addressing the service requests or complaints that came in through the tenants, their maintenance, requests, because when we came in, this is what we saw. And so that's something that we're going to look into more when we do requests, maybe request some of these logs that were out there.
And I think it's important to note that, you see a significant decrease in the number of properties we expect to be troubled and at risk. And since the initiation of the rent stabilization laws, owners and property managers have taken the troubled property and at-risk property much more seriously. Tamala mentioned that they're hiring consultants. Consultants are working with them. Usually they engage after they get their initial report. They're working with them on creating the corrective action plans. They're working with them on ensuring that all the violations are corrected before a reinspection. Some of these consultants are working with the properties, walking through during inspections or doing pre-inspections with them prior. And that has actually greatly assisted the department because it means that we have fewer re-inspections that we have to do. And of course, it goes without saying that our residents of Montgomery County are getting better services as a result of both our efforts and the installation of the rent stabilization laws.
So that was all the questions that we had as far as the updates that you required, or that you asked. Did you have any other questions for us?
Let's go ahead and go through the,
That was it.
yeah, okay.
Okay.
And then we can go to questions if you, or unless you all would
No,
like to go.
that sounds good.
Okay.
The next portion of the presentation talks about the proposed changes to the troubled property. That is a Regulation 1-25, which Director Bruton mentioned will be going over to council sometime soon for their consideration. It outlines the.
Sorry to interrupt. Do we have like a better timeline than sometime soon?
We should have, we are in talks with the Office of the County Attorney about the list of comments that we received from the industry. And we should, let's see, thinking about vacations in August, we should have it to you by September.
Yes, there's been some
Yes.
significant back and forth and engagement with some of the organizations that are interested in this bill. We've met with them several times, and there's been lots of electronic dialogue back and forth. So we most recently just got some clarified information from them in July, early July. So we're going through that to prepare it so that hopefully by the time we submit it to council, all of the public comments would have been considered, and you can have minimal changes after that.
Okay, so we should expect it
In September, yes.
Okay. It's helpful for us for planning purposes, for us to know.
So-
We have a busy fall, so.
So these new amended regulations do several things primarily. It outlines a new methodology which we'll use to evaluate the multifamily inspection results to determine if properties are troubled, at risk, or compliant. When the troubled property law was first enacted, there was a very kind of cumbersome, difficult methodology to evaluate properties, and it involved gathering all of the information of all of the properties that were inspected during that year, doing a summary analysis of all those, putting their scores into specific quadrants, and then using sort of averages. So there were quadrants that were compliant, at risk, 2 quadrants for at risk, 1 for compliant, and 1 for troubled. You had to plot those on that graph and then determine the averages to determine where the intersections of those quadrants would be. So properties actually had no way of knowing by what standard they were going to be judged until the end of the year, and you did that analysis. It was very difficult for us to administer, so we've changed that to using a fixed score, where we looked at averages over time of what the axes would be for the troubled and at risk and compliant, and came up with a fixed score to utilize that, which also will give us the ability to give them scores right after the inspection has been completed. So if we were to follow the letter of the law, we could do an inspection for a property in the beginning of the fiscal year. They might be troubled, they might not, but they wouldn't get their score until the end of the fiscal year. So we're now looking at giving their score within 30 days of the inspection being completed, and using a fixed score allows us to do that. They also amended what the property needs to do to get their troubled or at-risk designation changed. So this is giving them the opportunity to have a requested inspection, and not just sitting at risk for 2 years or trouble for 1 year, but giving them parameters on what they need to do in order to submit a requested inspection and have their designations change. And lastly, it sets the inspection fees. So these additional inspections are a large burden on the department to have to do. So currently, their first and second inspections will be free, and then there'll be escalated fees for the subsequent inspections that come after that, which actually mirrors the existing regulation for re-inspections. It also changes how we notify properties. So as I previously stated, under the current regulation, you can't really notify them until the end of the fiscal year because you have to compile all of those scores. And here, within 30 days of their scoring analysis being complete, we'll be able to give them their scores. The next slide sort of talks about the methodology that I've spoke about earlier. We're moving from the averages of all the properties at the end of the year to fixed scores that will allow us to give scores within 30 days of the inspection being completed.
And I will add that the fixed scores were one of the primary things that the landlords had asked for. It gives better predictability. It allows us, as Mr. Pavel was saying, to respond much more quickly. And it's something, this change doesn't transgress the letter or spirit of the existing troubled property law, and this also provides quicker mitigation of any housing code violations for the tenants. And so it's something the landlords wanted, and it provides quicker remediation for the tenants. So it's win-win all around.
Yeah, and the challenge with the initial regulation was that the whole idea of the troubled property law is to get properties up to a certain standard. If you use that initial methodology, you will always have properties that are troubled and at risk because those parameters get changed by the averages of those scores. What we did in this regulation, like I said, is used a fixed score, but we have the ability to adjust that. If standards we want to raise the bar, we have the ability to do that. The last thing that I will mention is that instead of using the quadrants to determine what their scores are, we look at their TV score and their SV score, and if their TV and SV score are both high, they're troubled. If one of them, but not both, are high, they're at risk, and if they're both low, then they're compliant. So it's a much easier way for us to, and cleaner way for us to arrive at those scores. The next slide is inspection fees. We discussed those already. So that pretty much concludes the update on the troubled property process, as well as the proposed changes to the executive regulation for troubled properties.
Oh, one thing that's not in the presentation that we should add, Nathan and Tamla and their team have been working with our IT staff as well as a contractor that we hired, a coder that we hired through TEBS's pool of coding contractors to improve the application that our inspectors use. It was created in the wake of the new troubled properties law. It had not been significantly changed for several years. It's an iOS app, so we needed to get somebody who's very skilled in iOS apps, and that's not what our folks are involved with. And so we are implementing a variety of changes to improve the weaknesses that the code staff had encountered over time, to make it more resilient. So we don't have crashes with the system if you're uploading, say, at a very large property, thousands and thousands of photos at the same time. But one of the things that this helps with, since we're doing this, is that since we're actively engaged with the coder, changes can also be made to facilitate the quicker compilation of these scores through how the information from the inspections is downloaded into our databases and then is available for these calculations. So, it's multiple things kind of coming together to improve the functioning of our system, and a lot of it's based on, the real world testing of the code enforcement team.
And I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge Ms. Robinson and Kay Williams, because pulling this data together for this report, while we can go through it quickly and it seems like nice, quick, and easy, it's an extremely tedious process. So thank you, Tamala, and thank you, Ms. Williams, if you're watching, for your efforts to pull this data together.
And then it also, with the application, we've also included in there a checklist in which you've asked for. And so that's being worked on, which is something that's going to be good, so that everyone is doing everything the right way.
So we're very excited. I don't know, it probably doesn't show on our faces right now, but we're very excited about the improvements, and we want to also thank and acknowledge that we got a lot of input from the council about what improvements were needed that were definitely taken into serious consideration, and we're looking forward to times ahead.
Great. Well, first of all, thanks for all the work. I really appreciate it. It sounds like there's a lot of progress being made. The Troubled Properties program needed some work, needed some TLC to really ensure that it was actually accomplishing what it was intended to do, which is to work together, to have open communication, to be able to be something that residents and tenants could rely on, and something for them to look at, something for county government to use as an opportunity to enforce, and most importantly, to make sure that we have safe and dignified places for people to live throughout the county. And we're not there yet, but we're heading in that direction, and it seems like the developments have been positive in terms of the progress that's being made, and I know it's taken longer than anybody would prefer on the resident side, on the landlord side, and certainly on the county government side, but appreciate the fact that we're moving in that direction. I will say that the data is encouraging. Not only are the changes encouraging, because I think they'll be clearer and more consistent and allow you to do your job better and allow everybody who's a stakeholder in this, tenants and property owners, to better understand, what's happening and where things are, and how things will be fixed, and to actually make sure that they do get fixed, which is the most important thing. But also think that the numbers in and of themselves show progress that's being made. When you have a better and clearer system, when you're communicating, when it's more effective, the numbers bear that out. And, it's numbers, but it's really people that we're talking about here. Of the number of troubled properties and at-risk properties are dramatically lower. And that's not because we're inspecting less, that's not because we're enforcing less, it's because there's more compliance, and the work is working. So thanks in that sense. With that, let me turn it over to colleagues. I'm going to start with Councilmember Fanny Gonzalez, who is here, and then Councilmember Joando has joined us, and we'll turn to him because I think he has some questions as well. So let me start with Councilmember Fanny Gonzalez, and then I'll turn it to you, Council Vice President Joando.
Thank you so much for your work. I'm very excited. I see progress happening. It takes a while to get things done in the right way, and I think you're showing that you're doing so. So thank you. I know it has not been easy, especially with us complaining all the time, but we do it with tough love. It's always love, and thank you for taking it strong and doing everything that you're doing to ensure that we're doing right for people. I was fascinating to hear the third parties coming in to help landlords to do their own inspections, but so by the time you guys come up or show up, some things are already fixed, or they can actually understand by a third party that the complaints are real and things need to move and change. So I see that as a big positive. Just out of curiosity, are these third parties like usually the same companies, or do you have any other type of contact with them? Because I want to make sure that whatever they're doing in their own inspections actually also makes sense with what you guys are doing, or have you seen any conflicts or a need to educate them on certain things, or not at all?
So we don't know who they actually hired.
Okay.
And speaking with the consultants that they hired, they probably would, have that information. It could be the same ones, because a lot of the larger properties have the same consultant that they're working with, but I don't know the actual names as to who they contracted to come in and do their maintenance and help their regular maintenance staff do the repairs.
What is
Yeah,
a
so, but there are two different issues. There's one is they have contractors who will come in to do sort of pre-inspections, and some of them actually are walking with Tamila's team as they're doing inspections so they can make those corrections right after they're identified. The other are the consultants who are helping them to prepare with their corrective action plans, to help them with their logs, and also to help them follow up on ensuring that the complaints the notices of violation that are issued get resolved in a timely manner, and trying to help them avoid getting citations. Those we have engaged with from time to time. I've actually had some conversations with some of them so I could better understand what their process was, and it's definitely a functionable, workable process, because we're seeing much less issues at those properties that engage either the maintenance contractors or the process consultants to help work them through the process after their inspections are initially completed.
And can you tell us if those properties that we know are in big, big trouble, are they the ones using these consultants? Are they? Yes.
Many are, yes.
Okay, that's a good thing. Okay, beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you. Vice President Jawanda.
Thank you very much. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Also want to share the excitement to see these numbers. I had to do a double take when I first read the presentation, and was really happy to see such a dramatic decrease. Obviously, with the caveat that there could be a slight adjustment, but I don't expect it to be. You don't expect it to be a massive change, I'm assuming.
Not at all, no.
Not at all.
Okay, great. And just want to thank you for your work. I'm also happy to hear around staffing. Obviously, we've spent a lot of time on this committee and on the previous Fed committee working towards building up your capacity. Really, really happy to hear that it's working. I've seen it in our casework. We work with you guys all the time, but we had one recently pops out in my mind earlier this summer. A resident in Bethesda had reached out, and your team jumped on it right away and followed up with next steps. And so just really, I see it in that aspect as well as the macro look. So thank you for all that. I just had a couple of questions related. Councilmember Fanny Gonzalez asked one of them about who was doing these inspections or pre-inspections and what information were we gleaning. The other related question I was going to ask to that was, you're comfortable. It sounded like you were, but I just want to emphasize, just give you an opportunity to expand on this. That when you're coming in, it's not the whatever the issue has been. You're not noticing the issues. For example, sometimes we used to hear complaints, and I know this is hard to detect, but someone would paint over mold or something, and then come in and you can't detect it. And that could be a problem whether you were inspecting or someone else was pre-inspecting. But it's an example of, are you really seeing, are there any issues where people are like, oh, they're just there's a short-term fix here, or they're actually, everyone's really happy with the level of non-issue, I guess, is that you're seeing in the inspections to have that dramatic decrease?
Thank you for that question. I think before it was a patch up, short term type thing where we'd come in and tell them to fix this, and that way it continued to happen. I think with these third party maintenance teams that are coming in, they're actually doing the work as well, and so they're doing a good job where we're not identifying as many violations as normal. Now, would we be able to identify whether or not they covered up mold? Sometimes not, right? Especially if it was just done, unless it starts seeping through again. But I think as far as the maintenance and going through the entire units to make sure, they're addressing the infestation, they're addressing, whether leaks are happening beforehand, where we're not coming in and finding them during the inspection. So a lot of that has been taken care of.
And we
That's great to
also
hear.
have several fail-safes to adjust for these scores. So we can, with the new regulation, still, if a property goes from troubled or at risk to compliant because of a reinspection, we can still reserve the right to be able to inspect them sooner if we do. So if we have a property that was troubled this year, they get a reinspection, they've done what they're supposed to do and they're compliant, we don't have to wait and inspect them in 3 years. We can still schedule an inspection sooner. And we also have the complaint process for people to call in complaints. If it looks like they just covered up the mold for the day of the inspection and it comes back, we'll get that complaint. So we'll be able to sort of take those things into consideration as we determine how quickly we're going to reinspect. And then lastly, we're scrutinizing much more their corrective action plans and tenant work request logs, specifically for the troubled properties, so that we can really understand what actions that property not only took place to get a good score, but what they plan to take place to maintain the property after that score is achieved.
The
That-
intent
that's
is,
great to
the
hear.
intent is to.
I'm sorry. Go
The
ahead.
intent is to habituate landlords and management companies that it's just in their interest and in best business practices to stay ahead of these things, and to also, our follow-ups being able to, even if you're compliant, go from trouble to compliant, to inspect in the following year, it checks up to make sure that the particular property has become habituated to checking on these things themselves regularly, and not just doing, as you were saying, patch jobs to just get through the inspection.
Yeah, and I think, you all mentioned this, but big headline here, one of the many benefits of rent stabilization is that folks are taking this serious. And we've had this troubled properties list for a long time. As I've mentioned, a council member who's actually lived in one of the troubled properties on the list. And the fact that in 1 year, since these regulations have been in place, and you can't raise rent unless you move yourself off the list, all this has happened is great for residents, but and like you said, ultimately good for landlords and owners, because you want to maintain a great property and keep satisfaction high. And so I just think it's also just a testament to that linkage worked really, really well. So I appreciate you lifting that up. Last thing I just wanted to say was, we have heard from some folks, now that we have the ULTA, the ORS, the OCP, you have various offices. As tenants have navigated multiple issues, sometimes there can be a thing where they've been referred to different people and have to go to different places to get help. And I would just ask that you can respond now or think about this, but keeping track of where you're going as a individual resident, if you have to go to this office and that office for that and this office for that, say you have a violation of the rent stabilization law here, and then you have an ULTA thing here, and it could become cumbersome. Has there been any thought about having a single point of contact, or someone who could liaise someone through all of those various entities? Just something to throw out there.
Sure. We're looking at that in a few different ways. Number one, for Office of Landlord Tenant Affairs and Office of Rent Stabilization, both of those are within DHCA and they're in the same division. And so the division chief and the two managers of those programs confer on a daily basis when something comes in as to whether it falls under rent stabilization or landlord tenant affairs. But then with the new law that, or the amended law that places landlords under merchants, so that it
Consumer
gets into
protection, yeah.
deceptive business practices. Our staff, two of our division chiefs, Nathan and Zachary Patton, have been working with the folks over at Office of Consumer Protection and have developed a draft set of standard operating procedures that sets out standards for if, for example, if OCP receives a complaint related to a landlord, they will, in most all cases, refer that to the Office of Landlord Tenant Affairs for further information gathering, and we will report back to them. And so we have, and those will hopefully soon be finalized, and so we'll have, kind of regular standards for how any type of incoming complaint is handled, and then once a complaint comes in, which of those three offices will handle the complaint depending on kind of which part of the law or regulation it transgresses.
But
Got
our
it.
overall goal is to make it as easy for the customer as
Yeah.
possible and not have to have them navigate through multiple programs to get their issue resolved, to try to have one program sort of be the main
Got
person that interacts with the customer, so it's much easier for them.
And we do internally communicate, so if also gets a complaint that could just be property maintenance, they will, let us know internally, saying, hey, this service request is for you. So we'll take care of it from that. So they don't have to call back to 311 as they already have. So we are working internally as well.
Yeah, and to,
Awesome.
you were asking for a common intake. 311 will be informed about our standard operating procedures to give them guidance on where to funnel any questions or complaints. But then also, because we want to be responsive, tenants can also reach out to any of our offices directly. And so that's where the kind of internal funneling will happen. We don't want to just say, we're not going to talk to you unless you call 311 first.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. Thank you for all your work, and really happy to see the progress. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, appreciate it. Unless there are any other comments or questions, we look forward and are eagerly awaiting the amended regulations to be presented to the council in September. We will take that up in due course. After that, appreciate your work in finalizing this. We're hopeful that the numbers only get slightly better, but don't get dramatically changed, and don't get any worse. But appreciate all the work and the efforts to get us to this point. It's clearly some progress, and that's important, particularly when we're talking about the safety of our living opportunities for our residents. So thank you. With that, we're going to move on to our next item, and I do believe we have Councilmember Mink, who has joined us virtually. We'll invite up Ms. Nadeau. We'll do a little bit of council member swap here, and I believe we have planning with us as well. This is a zoning text amendment 2508 that was introduced by Councilmember Mink, who I noted is joining us. I believe we have Mr. Berbert, Mr. Salazar, who are here from the executive branch and from planning to talk through this. We'll welcome Councilmember Mink as well. And ultimately, this is a zoning text amendment to allow contractors in the rural cluster zone who have expanded their footprint beyond what was otherwise permissible to maintain a grandfathered status if the property owner returns the total square footage of on-site operations to what existed as of October 30th, 2014. This is related to the zoning rewrite. There are some dynamics related to the zoning rewrite and some changes that were made, and the attempt here is to help to clarify and to make things a little cleaner and easier and allow for it to be a little bit easier to operate. So I'll turn it to the sponsor to go into more detail for the impetus behind this, and then I'll turn it over to Ms. Nadeau to walk us through the packet, and we'll invite up our colleagues from Planning and Executive Branch should there be any questions as needed. With that, Councilmember Mink, welcome.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to Ms. Nadeau for the very clear packet and for your work on drafting this ZTA. So the purpose, as the Chair stated, is it makes a small change in the code to create consistency for landscape contractors and avoid legacy landscapers accidentally triggering a major regulatory burden because of a minor infrastructure tweak or a good faith minor error that they're willing to correct. It is in keeping with the intent of the policy the Chair mentioned that the Council adopted a few years ago, which created a legacy status for landscape contractors in certain zones with certain conditions. And right now, per that policy, a small number of landscape contractors in the RC zone are legacied in and do not need a conditional use approval to operate, as long as they don't expand the footprint of their operations beyond what existed in October 2014, which makes good sense. The hiccup that this ZTA will iron out is that many of these landscape contractors are not aware of their legacy status or the implications. And if they then, not knowing that, expand their footprint or even change their layout without expanding their footprint, this triggers a notice of violation from DPS and loss of their legacy status, with no opportunity to return their operation to the original layout or footprint in order to stay compliant. This means that they then have to immediately stop operations and go through the conditional use application process. And this really is an intensive burden for these local businesses that the policy that was passed in 2018 was intended to avoid. So the ZTA will allow those landscape contractors to maintain their legacy status if, after no more than one violation, they return to the total square footage of on-site operations that existed in 2014. If they violated again, obviously they knew because they got the one violation. So if they violated again, they do lose that status. They would be able to change the layout of their operations as long as the total square footage does not exceed that which existed in October of 2014. The Planning Board strongly supports the ZTA as introduced, and we did not receive any testimony in opposition to the ZTA in writing or at the public hearing. So with that, I will thank the committee for your consideration, and I yield back to the chair.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Appreciate your work on this. And Ms. Nadeau's, I'll just note, in general, if there is an interest from the county government and from a private actor to work together to address an issue or concern in a reasonable way, we should provide the tools to do that. And that really, at a high level, if we kind of take a step back from zoning language and the zoning code and these particular businesses and conditional use and other standards, that's really what we're trying to do here, to make sure that when there is a problem, there's an opportunity to get it fixed in a reasonable way and to do so with the tools to make it happen. So with that, appreciate it. Let me turn it over to Ms. Nadeau, and you can walk us through the packet, and we can take up any questions as they arise.
Thank you. So I won't go through the public hearing because our lead sponsor went through that. And again, as noted, Planning Board recommended approval without amendment. We did receive a climate assessment that found minor positive and negative impacts, the negative being the deconstruction of structures and pavement. But on the other side, there could be decreased imperviousness and increased green area. I will also note a positive RESJ impact statement because this would narrow inequities in entrepreneurship by ethnicity. As a little bit of background here, under the current zoning ordinance, a landscape contractor is a conditional use in our agricultural, rural residential, and residential detached zones. It's only limited or permitted in the industrial zones, and that is because of that 2018 ZTA. So grandfathering provisions, also called legacy provisions, what happened is when the change was made to make these conditional uses, there were already many that existed as permitted uses, and as noted, the intent of this ZTA is to give them a chance to stay at their 2014 size, because that was the actual goal of that ZTA in 2018. So the two ways to do that were, one, if they receive the one violation notice, they can correct it. I know this seems very strange to say, usually ignorance of the law is not an excuse, but in this instance, in zoning, when DPS issues a zoning violation, you can usually work with DPS to fix whatever that violation here. And because of the way this was phrased in the current zoning ordinance, that opportunity was not there. And so that is why that change would allow to fix the first violation notice, but then after that, of course, you're on notice, and then you would have to close or get a conditional use. And then the other small but mighty change is adding the term total square footage. This is because landscape contractor is a very unique use. It's not made up of many buildings like other uses are. A landscape contractor, there could be a pile of landscaping materials. There could be cars that were parked on the left side and now they're parked on the right side. And because that's an expansion of the boundary of the use, DPS, rightly so, was saying that was an expansion. So by adding the word total square footage, it'll be the total size. So if a pile of dirt shifts a little to the left or a little to the right, that doesn't mean that there will be a violation issued. And that's the ZTA before you. No amendments from anyone, excitingly.
All right. Any questions, comments? Councilmember Fanny Gonzalez.
Thank you so much to Councilmember Mink. I think the ZTA totally makes sense, and I'm glad you're working on it. I look forward to voting yes.
Okay, well, not to snatch conflict from the jaws of consensus, it seems like there are no questions or comments and no issues brought forward from staff. So with that, all those in favor of this zoning text amendment, please raise your hand. That is 3-0. Congratulations, Councilmember Mink. We will move this along to the full council with the unanimous support of the committee. And with that, and with thanks to DPS and planning for being here in case questions came up, which they didn't, because you did such a good job working with council staff in advance, this PHP meeting is now adjourned.